On a freezing night, 2 police officers forced an entire family, a father, a mother, and their 2 young daughters, to strip down in the icy cold under the guise of a routine check. Little did they know that the man they humiliated was destined to become their new chief of police. How will he confront this injustice while protecting his family and rebuilding trust in the system? Don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments about where you're watching this story unfold. The cold wind howled through the barren trees along the road, carrying the icy breath of winter. Thick snow blanketed the ground, turning the road white. The headlights of Mike Anderson's family car illuminated the dark road ahead, barely enough to see a few meters forward. Inside the car, the air was warm. Sarah, his wife, sat in the passenger seat, adjusting the scarf of Emily, their eldest daughter, who was sitting in the back seat with her younger sister Lily. And then the ghost screamed. "I'll take you all," Emily narrated, reaching out her hands in a spooky gesture, making Lily shriek. Both sisters burst into fits of laughter. Mike smiled through the rearview mirror. "Emily, don't scare your sister too much. If Lily can't sleep tonight, you'll have to tell her a different story to calm her down." "I was just trying to make her laugh, Dad," Emily protested, but held her sister's hand reassuringly. "Don't worry, I'm just joking." Lily, her big eyes full of innocence, leaned her head against her sister's shoulder. "I'm not scared, but keep telling the story. Don't let the ghost take us all." Sarah shook her head gently, smiling as she looked out the window. The snow stretched endlessly, the silence broken only by the howling wind. Her mother had urged them to stay overnight due to the bad weather. But Mike had decided to return home early because of an important meeting the next morning. Everything seemed normal until the car suddenly jolted and came to a stop. Mike frowned, glancing at the dashboard. The engine warning light was blinking red. He tried restarting the car, but the engine made a clanking noise and fell silent. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with worry. "Probably a minor issue," Mike replied calmly. "You and the kids stay in the car. I'll check it out." Stepping outside, Mike was immediately met with the biting cold that stung his face, forcing him to tighten his coat. The wind seemed to pierce through every layer, and the snow crunched beneath his feet as he moved to the front of the car. He popped the hood, peering into a haze of steam rising into the frigid air. "Perfect timing to act up," Mike muttered. He wasn't a car expert, and this situation made him feel helpless. After sneezing once, he turned back toward the car to inform Sarah that they would need to call for roadside assistance. Suddenly, a bright light from another vehicle's headlights appeared in the distance. A police patrol car was approaching. Mike let out a sigh of relief, hopeful for assistance. He stood by the roadside, signaling with his hand. The patrol car stopped just behind his vehicle. 2 officers stepped out. The older one, with a stern and cold demeanor, was named David. The younger one, tall but with a mocking expression, was Steve. Both were in full uniform, their faces showing no trace of friendliness. "Got a problem here?" David asked, shining a flashlight directly into Mike's face, making him squint. "My car broke down. I was checking to see what's wrong." Mike tried to keep his voice steady. "My family's in the car, and I was planning to call for assistance if I couldn't fix it." Steve approached, crossing his arms. "Your family? Out here at this hour? That's odd." "We're returning from the suburbs," Mike explained, but he couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling from their scrutinizing gazes. David signaled Steve before walking toward the car. "Mind if I take a look inside?" Without waiting for a response, he opened the door and glanced inside. Sarah held Lily tightly, while Emily glared at David with a nervous expression. "This your family?" David asked, his tone as if accusing Mike of some wrongdoing. Mike felt anger rising but held it back. "Yes, this is my wife and 2 daughters. I hope you can help us call for roadside assistance." Steve smirked. "Roadside assistance? You seem awfully rushed. Who knows, maybe you got something illegal hidden in there." Mike clenched his fist, suppressing his growing fury. "We haven't done anything wrong. I just want to get my family home." David turned back to Mike, his eyes cold. "Step out of the car. All of you. We need to inspect further." Sarah looked at Mike in alarm. He nodded, signaling his wife and daughters to step out. Lily clung to her mother, while Emily stepped down with a wary look. The freezing wind rushed in, making the family huddle together for warmth. Steve sneered. "I think we should be thorough. If you've got nothing to hide, why not strip down for inspection?" "What?" Sarah exclaimed, horrified. Mike froze. "This is unnecessary. You're overstepping." David shrugged. "Follow orders, or do you want us to take your whole family back to the station for a long night?" Mike looked at Sarah and his daughters, torn, but he knew refusing could escalate things further. Slowly, he nodded. "We'll comply." In the dim glow of the car's headlights, amidst the biting cold, the Anderson family was forced to strip down, shivering in the snow. Emily tried to shield Lily, tears streaming down her face. Sarah trembled, avoiding the officers' gazes. Mike stood still, clenching his fists, struggling to maintain composure as rage stormed within him. When David and Steve finally left, leaving the family humiliated and freezing, Mike knelt down, wrapping his arms around his wife and daughters, shielding them with his body. He made a silent vow. "They will pay for this. I promise you, justice will be served." The air inside the car was heavy, filled only with Sarah's labored breathing and Lily's muffled sobs. Emily sat motionless, clinging to her mother, her gaze fixed on the window where darkness and white snow blurred into an indistinct, chilling scene. Mike sat behind the wheel, gripping it so tightly his knuckles turned white. He couldn't bear to look back at his family. A torrent of helplessness, shame, and anger churned within him. As a husband, a father, he had failed to protect the people he loved most. "Mike," Sarah's voice trembled, a mix of reproach and desperation. Why did you let this happen? What did we do to deserve this?" Mike tightened his grip on the wheel and finally turned to face her. "Sarah, if I had fought back, things could have been worse. I had to choose the safest way for you and the kids." Sarah shook her head, her eyes red with tears. "Safe? You call being forced to strip in the freezing snow safe? Look at the kids, Mike. Look at Emily and Lily." Emily turned when she heard her name. The innocence that usually lit up her 12-year-old face was gone. Her eyes burned with a pain no child her age should endure. "Dad, why did they do this to us?" she asked, her voice choked. Mike had no answer. His throat felt tight, as though guilt itself was strangling him. Lily, clutching her mother tightly, whispered timidly, "Are they bad people, Mommy?" Sarah didn't respond. Mike turned to look at his daughters. Lily buried her face in her mother's chest, but Emily stared directly at him, waiting for an explanation. Her gaze was like a dagger piercing his heart. Without a word, Mike opened the car door and stepped out. The biting cold immediately enveloped him, but he didn't care. He trudged a few steps into the snow, then stopped, gazing up at the snowy sky. His breath came out in wisps of white mist, merging with the frigid air. "Mike," Sarah called after him, "where are you going?" But he didn't answer. He stood there, fists clenched. The image of Emily huddling with her sister, her eyes red from crying, replayed endlessly in his mind. The humiliation his family had just endured was unforgivable, but he knew that letting anger consume him would lead nowhere. "Girls, I promise," Mike murmured, his voice carried away by the wind. "I promise I won't let this happen to anyone else again. We won't just be silent victims. I'll do everything I can to see justice served." He turned back toward the car, where Sarah and the girls were still waiting. When he got into the driver's seat, Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with doubt. "Mike, what are you planning? Don't let your anger cloud your judgment." Mike placed his hand on hers, his voice steady. "I'm not angry, Sarah, but I won't let this go. I'll protect our family. I promise." Emily looked up at her father, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Dad, I want to help you. If you need me, I'll tell our story so people can understand." For the first time since the ordeal, Mike managed a faint smile. "You're still young, Emily, but as long as you believe in me, that's enough." Sarah. Deeply scarred by the experience, Sarah felt like a failure as a mother for not being able to protect her children. Her emotions were a chaotic mix of anger, fear, and a fragile hope, knowing Mike was doing his best to keep them safe. Emily. As the older sibling, Emily began to realize that her family wasn't at fault. It was those who abused their power who were in the wrong. Her quiet anger wasn't just directed at their tormentors. It fueled a growing desire to stand up for justice. Lily. With her young, innocent mind, Lily mostly felt fear in the cold. She clung to her mother and sister, finding comfort in Emily's protective embrace. The experience left her timid and afraid, but her bond with her family became her greatest solace. That morning, the sky was clear and blue without a single cloud, but the air still carried a crisp chill after the previous night's snowstorm. Mike Anderson stood before the mirror in his new office, adjusting the tie around his neck. The police chief's uniform emphasized his authoritative demeanor, but his eyes betrayed a heavy burden that was hard to define. He remembered his promise to his family, the very promise that fueled his determination. The central meeting room at the police department was packed. Everyone, from rookies to seasoned officers, gathered to welcome the new chief. Some eyes were curious, others skeptical, and a few merely indifferent. In the corner of the room, David and Steve leaned against the wall, exchanging glances. Steve whispered, "That's him, isn't it?" David nodded stiffly. "Yeah, but he can't do anything to us. He wouldn't dare." The main door swung open. Mike entered, exuding confidence without arrogance. The noise in the room immediately died down. Each step he took echoed on the floor, every eye turning to him. Mike walked directly to the podium, glancing briefly across the room. His gaze lingered for a moment on David and Steve, but quickly moved on. There was no anger, no provocation, just the calm resolve of someone who knew what had to be done. Placing both hands on the podium, Mike took a deep breath before speaking. "Thank you all for being here today. I'm not here to make empty promises. I have only one commitment. This police department will become a symbol of justice, not fear. We are not just here to protect the community. We must also protect the integrity of our badge. And to do that, no one, not even me, stands above the law." The room fell silent. Some nodded in agreement, their eyes lighting up with hope. But in the corner, David and Steve exchanged smirks as if Mike's words meant nothing. Mike continued, his voice firm, each word resonating in the still air. "We will face many challenges, but I believe that with unity and responsibility we can transform everything. I am ready to listen and collaborate to make that happen." After his speech, Mike left the meeting room and returned to his office. Waiting for him, there was Thomas, a veteran colleague with a commanding presence. Thomas's gaze was warm as he extended a handshake. "Welcome, Chief Anderson," Thomas said, a faint smile on his weathered face. "I've heard about you, and I believe you're the kind of person who can make a difference here." Mike smiled, shaking his hand firmly. "Thank you, Thomas, but I can't do this alone. I'll need your help and the support of others like you." Thomas nodded, his tone serious. "You've got my support, but let me warn you, change won't come easy. Some here are set in their ways, and some, like David and Steve, for instance, won't back down quietly." Hearing the names of the men who had wronged his family, Mike felt a flicker of anger rise within him. But he suppressed it, keeping his tone steady. "I know, but I won't let anyone stand in my way, and I won't let anyone abuse their power to hurt others again." That evening, when Mike returned home, Emily was sitting at the dining table with her journal in front of her. She looked up as her father walked in, her eyes filled with curiosity and seriousness. "How was work today, Dad?" she asked. Mike sat down next to his daughter, loosening his tie with a sigh of relief. "It was fine, sweetheart, but it won't be easy." Emily was quiet for a moment, then pushed her journal toward him. "I've been writing about what happened that day. Not just to remember, but so if you need it, I can tell anyone who needs to hear." Mike looked at his daughter, his eyes filled with pride. He gently placed his hand over hers. "You're stronger than I ever imagined, but you don't have to do this alone. I'll stand up to protect our family and anyone else who can't stand up for themselves." Emily smiled, her eyes shining with determination. "I believe in you, Dad, and I'll help you if you need me." Mike hugged his daughter gently, feeling a renewed warmth and sense of purpose. He knew the road ahead would be fraught with obstacles, but with Emily, Sarah, and Lily by his side, he was ready to face anything to keep his promise to his family and deliver justice for all. The following days, the police department began to show small but noticeable changes. Mike spent most of his time listening to feedback from the community and his colleagues. He understood that changing a system couldn't rely solely on orders. It required building trust on both sides, within the police force and with the public. Mike organized community meetings, inviting residents to share their concerns. In a small meeting room at the community center, he stood before dozens of locals, most of whom appeared hesitant and uneasy. Some looked at him with skepticism, while others held faint glimmers of hope in their eyes. "We cannot change the past," Mike began, his voice strong yet sincere. "But I believe we can do better. This police force exists not just to uphold the law, but to protect you, the people who have placed their trust in us." An elderly woman stood up, her voice trembling. "I called the police once when my son was threatened by a group of young men on the street. But instead of helping, they fined him for causing a disturbance. They told him he wasn't allowed in that area and threatened me with heavier fines if I complained." The room fell silent. Mike stepped closer to the woman, his gaze filled with empathy. I'm deeply sorry that happened to you. I promise you that such incidents won't be ignored anymore, and I need your help. If you know of other cases like this, please share them so we can take action." Gradually, others began sharing their stories. Initially hesitant, they found courage as the fear in the room gave way to determination. Their stories came together like pieces of a puzzle, painting a picture of a system that had been abused for far too long. Back at the station, Mike continued his internal investigations. Thomas, his most loyal ally, stood by him through it all. One late evening, the two sat in the office, poring over old files. "Here it is," Thomas said, pointing to a report. David and Steve once handled a compliance check at a small convenience store. They fined the owner for security violations, but when I asked for evidence, there was none. The owner eventually closed the shop because he couldn't bear the pressure. Mike picked up the file, his expression darkening. "They've been doing this for a long time. This isn't just abuse of power. It's intimidation and exploitation of fear for personal gain." Thomas nodded. "And they're not acting alone. Others in the force have turned a blind eye, or even helped them." Mike leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. He knew that gathering evidence was not just about exposing David and Steve, but also the first step in cleaning up the entire system. However, he also understood that this wouldn't be easy, as those benefiting from the corruption wouldn't give up without a fight. Meanwhile, Emily was becoming a special companion to her father. One evening, as Mike was reviewing his notes, Emily walked in holding a piece of paper. "Dad, I drew this," she said, placing the paper on his desk. It was a family portrait, but instead of the usual cheerful scene, Emily had drawn them standing under a dark sky, surrounded by tiny stars. In the picture, Mike stood at the center, radiating light that pushed back the darkness. "You're the light, just like I saw that day. You protected us, and now you're going to protect everyone else too." Mike looked at his daughter, his heart swelling with pride. "You're so special, sweetheart. You know, it's your light and Lily's that keeps me going." Meanwhile, David and Steve began to feel the pressure from the changes Mike was implementing. They could see their control slipping as colleagues who had once stayed silent now started turning against them. One evening at a bar near the station, Steve said to David, "He's messing everything up. If we don't act, it won't be long before everything crashes down on us." David frowned, his eyes cold. "He wants to play? Fine. But he won't win." Mike knew he was walking a dangerous path. His efforts challenged not only David and Steve, but also a part of the system that had grown comfortable with abuse. But every time he thought of Emily's eyes or the stories shared by the community, he knew he couldn't stop. On a cold winter night, Mike stood by his office window, looking out at the quiet city. He whispered to himself as if making a vow, "This is just the beginning. I won't let them hurt anyone else." That morning, rare sunlight streamed through the meeting room window at the police department, creating an atmosphere of quiet yet palpable tension. Mike Anderson sat at the head of the table, surrounded by senior officers from the department, including both allies and those covertly opposing him. Today, he had resolved to present the first pieces of evidence against David and Steve's misconduct. Mike stood up, his gaze sweeping across the room before he began. "I've called this meeting to address a serious issue of power abuse within the department. This is not just a personal matter. It's about the honor and trust our community places in us." Murmurs arose among the officers. Some appeared uneasy, while others, like David and Steve, leaned back in their chairs, arms crossed, exuding defiance. Mike opened the leather briefcase in front of him and pulled out a thick folder. Over the past few weeks, we've gathered clear evidence of 2 officers abusing their power. These actions include intimidation, extortion, and harassment of civilians, people we're supposed to protect. The room fell silent. Mike opened the folder and began presenting each case in detail. He shared testimonies from victims, including an elderly woman who recounted her son being threatened, and evidence showing that David and Steve had unlawfully seized assets from a small shop under the pretense of security violations. David, seated in the back, suddenly stood up. "That's enough, Mike," he said, his tone firm. "You're accusing us without concrete evidence. These are just one-sided accounts from a few civilians. We followed protocol." Mike didn't waver. He pulled out a copy of a financial report related to the shop incident. "This is the asset seizure report you filed. However, there's no record of these assets being legally transferred or processed. And here," he produced an audio recording, "is the shop owner's testimony, asserting that you demanded payment to avoid further threats." Steve struggled to maintain composure, but his frustration was evident. "This is fabricated. You think a few papers will stand against us?" Mike's gaze burned into him. "Steve, these aren't just papers. They're the voices of the people you victimized, and they're no longer afraid." Thomas, a loyal ally of Mike, stepped forward with another folder. "We've also uncovered evidence that these 2 officers used their influence to pressure colleagues into suppressing reports of their misconduct. These reports were blocked before reaching command." David, his face red with anger, approached Mike's desk. "Who do you think you are? You've been here a few weeks and think you can take over? Remember this, Mike. No one goes against the system, not you, not anyone." Mike stood his ground, his voice steady and cold. "David, I'm not fighting the system. I'm cleaning it up, and if you're a part of the problem, you'll be removed." The room was silent. Officers exchanged glances, their eyes reflecting mixed emotions, some with respect, others with fear, but all recognizing Mike's resolve. Following the meeting, David and Steve were suspended pending a formal investigation. They left the room, their glares filled with hostility directed at Mike. Before exiting, David turned back, his voice low enough for Mike to hear. "Don't think this ends here. We'll be back, and you'll pay." Mike didn't respond, his steadfast gaze following them. He knew this was only the beginning. Men like David and Steve wouldn't back down easily, but he also knew he wasn't alone. Honest officers like Thomas and the community's growing support were becoming a solid shield for him. That evening, when Mike returned home, Emily was waiting for him in the living room. She ran to him, holding his hand. "What did you do today, Dad?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. Mike knelt down, looking into his daughter's eyes. "I stood up to people who've hurt others, but I still have a lot of work to do. Do you believe I can do it?" Emily smiled and hugged her father tightly. "I always believe in you, and if anyone tries to hurt you, I'll protect you." Mike laughed, though his heart swelled with pride. "Thank you, Emily. You're my biggest motivation." That night, Mike sat at his desk, his gaze fixed on the window. The city was quiet, but he knew the real storm was looming. David's threats echoed in his mind, but he was undeterred. "I won't stop," he whispered to himself. "They can threaten me, but they can't stop justice." The light from Mike's office stayed on late into the night, while the darkness outside seemed to creep closer, waiting to strike. But Mike knew that as long as he held on to his convictions, he would find the strength to face whatever lay ahead. The light from Mike's office window spilled onto the quiet street outside, casting a long beam across the snowy ground. Inside the silent room, the only sound was the scrape of his pen against paper, as Mike documented the information he had gathered. It had been weeks since David and Steve were suspended from duty, but the situation was far from calm. Strange occurrences began to arise, like cold winds forewarning an approaching storm. First, there were the odd calls. In the dead of night, Mike's phone would ring, but the only response was heavy breathing on the other end. No words. Then a note was slipped under his door, bearing a terse yet menacing message. "Stop before your family pays the price." Mike sat in his office, holding the note. His gaze was steely, showing no trace of fear. "They think they can scare me off with this," he muttered. But he also knew that this time David and Steve weren't merely making threats, they were planning a direct attack. That evening, in a small bar tucked behind rows of old buildings, David and Steve sat in a secluded corner with a group of unfamiliar faces. Spread across the table were sheets of paper detailing Mike's personal information as well as that of his family. Steve smirked, tapping his fingers rhythmically on the table. "Who does he think he is? We lost everything because of him, and now it's his turn to pay." David leaned back in his chair, his cold eyes fixed on pictures of Emily and Lily. "Mike Anderson is stubborn, but everyone has a weakness. His family is his." One of the men in the group, his hair cropped short and face rugged, spoke up. "What's the plan? Kidnap them, or just scare him into backing off?" David smirked, his voice low but razor sharp. "We'll start with fear, but if he doesn't get the message, I'm not afraid to escalate." 2 days later, Emily noticed a strange car following her on her way home from school. The black vehicle with tinted windows trailed her slowly. At first, Emily thought it was her imagination, but when the car continued to follow her to the grocery store near her house, unease set in. Quickly stepping into the store, Emily sought both safety and a reprieve from the car's view. She stood behind the counter, pulling out her phone to call her father. "Dad, I think someone's following me," she said, her voice trembling but steady. Mike immediately left his office upon hearing his daughter's voice. "Emily, stay in the store. Don't come out until I get there." While waiting, Emily glanced out the window and saw the car still parked outside. Remembering her father's advice to note suspicious license plates, she grabbed a scrap of paper and jotted down the number. She handed it to the cashier, asking them to keep it safe. When the patrol team led by Thomas arrived, the car was gone. But, thanks to Emily's quick thinking, the plate number led Mike's team to identify the car's owner, one of the men hired by David and Steve to exact their revenge. Mike wasted no time. A professional security team was hired to monitor his home and a family around the clock. Sarah and Lily were moved to a safe location in the suburbs, while Emily, after her mother's approval, chose to stay with her father. "I don't want to run," she said firmly. "I want to stay and help." Mike hugged his daughter tightly, recognizing her newfound maturity after the ordeal. "You're brave, Emily, but I need you to promise to stay within my reach." Emily nodded, her eyes filled with determination. "I promise, Dad." Meanwhile, David and Steve were beginning to feel the weight of their repeated failures. The people they hired started withdrawing, fearful of exposure. Even police officers who had once turned a blind eye or supported them began to distance themselves. During a brief meeting at the bar, Steve slammed his hand on the table in frustration. "He's playing us, David. Not only is he dismantling our plans, but he's also making us a laughingstock." David, though trying to appear composed, couldn't hide his own concerns. "We've left too many traces. If we don't erase everything, it won't just be about losing our jobs. He'll have us in court." Steve looked at David, his eyes filled with dread. "So, what do we do now?" David stared at his beer, his voice low and grave. "We need a new plan. But first, we have to ensure no one else stands with him." Mike knew this battle was far from over and would only grow more dangerous, but he was undeterred. At his office, he gathered Thomas and his loyal teammates to devise their next move. "We're not just protecting my family," Mike declared, his voice resolute. "We're ensuring no one else in the police force abuses their power again." The team nodded in agreement, their trust in Mike evident. He knew his greatest strength wasn't in authority or position, but in the trust of those around him, his family, his team, and his community. As night fell, the light in Mike's office remained aglow. Outside, darkness seemed to envelop the city, but within him, the fire of justice burned brightly. Mike knew David and Steve wouldn't give up easily, but he was ready. "This is my family," he whispered, his eyes unwavering, "and I'll do whatever it takes to protect them." The sky darkened gradually, and the sparse yellow streetlights along the suburban road cast a cold, tense glow on the snowy ground. Mike stood in front of a map in the conference room at the police station, surrounded by Thomas and a carefully chosen team. Each officer was a trusted ally who had worked alongside him throughout the investigation. On the table lay a thick file packed with undeniable evidence against David, Steve, and their accomplices. "We know where they are," Mike said in a low, determined voice. "David and Steve think they can hide and continue their revenge plans, but tonight we'll end this once and for all." Thomas nodded. "They're at the abandoned warehouse on the east side of the city. I've had people keeping a distant watch. That's where they gather to plan and hide evidence." Mike glanced around the room, his gaze igniting a fire of inspiration. "We're not just going there to arrest them. We're going to make it clear that abuse of power at any level will never be tolerated." The task force began their preparations in silence. Guns were checked, vests tightened. The looks exchanged carried a unified message. Tonight, there would be no room for mistakes. As the convoy of patrol cars approached the warehouse, the scene was engulfed in silence. The wind howled through the old walls, carrying the biting chill of a winter night. The patrol cars' headlights dimmed as they neared, leaving only faint glimmers from distant streetlights. Mike signaled to his team, who swiftly split into smaller groups, quietly taking their positions. He led the main group straight toward the warehouse's front entrance, while Thomas and others surrounded the area to block every exit. Inside, David and Steve were arguing. Steve paced nervously, his eyes filled with unease. "We can't keep going like this, David. Things are spiraling out of control. He's got enough evidence to bring us down." David, lounging against an old wooden crate, smirked with contempt. "Does he think he's clever? Do you think I'll let it end like this? Mike Anderson isn't the first to try to take me down, and he won't be the last." Steve stopped, glaring at David. "How much longer until they get here? We have to act before it's too late." David didn't reply immediately. His eyes swept over the scattered documents on the table, incriminating evidence he hadn't yet destroyed. They'll be here soon, but this time we won't run. We'll show him that no one crosses us without paying the price. The sound of a gun being cocked nearby broke the tension. David looked up, his eyes flashing with menace. "Get ready. He's coming." The warehouse door was suddenly kicked open, the hinges screeching into the stillness. Mike stepped in first, his gun aimed forward. Behind him, the task force stormed in, swiftly securing the area. "Freeze! Hands on your head!" Mike shouted, his voice echoing in the old space. David and Steve froze. For a moment, David's confidence evaporated, replaced by shock, but he quickly regained his composure, smirking as if it were all a joke. "So, you've come, Mike," he sneered. "I knew you would." "The game's over, David," Mike replied firmly. "Everything is out in the open. You've got nowhere to hide." David shrugged, slowly raising his hands, but his eyes remained defiant. "You think you've won, Mike? You're just a fool trying to fight a system you can't even begin to comprehend." Mike stepped closer, his gaze steely. "I'm not trying to fix the whole system overnight, but I can remove people like you, those who have corroded it. Justice isn't impossible, David. It starts by confronting people like you." David let out a bitter laugh. "Justice? This system is built to crush people like you, Mike. You might catch me, but there are countless others like me out there. Do you think you can beat them all?" Mike paused, his eyes locked on David. "Maybe I can't beat them all, but I won't stop trying. Justice doesn't begin with perfection. It begins with the actions of those who dare to stand up." David and Steve were handcuffed and escorted outside under the glare of the patrol car's headlights. Their faces, once full of arrogance, now looked hollow. Mike stood still, watching them being loaded into the car, a mixture of satisfaction and unease washing over him. He knew he had fulfilled part of his duty, but understood this was only a small victory in a longer battle. Back at the police station, Mike convened an emergency meeting. He placed the file and evidence on the table, his gaze sweeping across his team. "Today is an important day," he began. "What we did wasn't just about arresting two people. It's a clear message that anyone who abuses power will be held accountable. Starting today, we'll rebuild the community's trust in law enforcement." Applause erupted, first from a few individuals, then spreading throughout the room. It wasn't ceremonial, but genuine respect for Mike, a man who had dared to make a difference. That night, as Mike returned home, Emily ran to hug him tightly. "Dad, you did it, didn't you?" she asked, her eyes glowing with pride. Mike smiled, kneeling to meet her gaze. "I did part of it, Emily, but my journey isn't over yet. I promise to protect our family and those who can't protect themselves." Sarah joined them, wrapping her arms around Mike alongside Lily. The family stood together under the warm glow of the lamp, amidst the chill of the winter night. It was a moment of peace Mike had fought to protect, and he knew he would never stop fighting. The morning after the arrests, the atmosphere at the police station was unusually lively. Officers gathered in small groups, discussing last night's events incessantly. The arrest of David and Steve, two figures once considered untouchable within the force. Overwhelming evidence was not just a shock, but a powerful declaration from Mike Anderson. No one is above the law. Mike entered the central meeting room where officers and community representatives were already waiting for the official announcement. Standing tall, his gaze swept across the faces before him. though a few eyes still reflected doubt. Most were filled with respect. "What we did yesterday," Mike began, his voice steady and resolute, "was not just about arresting 2 individuals. It was about sending a clear message. Anyone who abuses power will be held accountable, regardless of who they are or what position they hold." A young officer stood up, his eyes shining with determination. "Chief Anderson, I want to thank you. In the past, we didn't dare speak up, but now I believe I can be proud to be part of this team." Applause erupted throughout the room. Mike allowed himself a small smile, nodding. He knew that this trust was hard-earned, and his responsibility now was to safeguard it. In the days that followed, the arrests of David and Steve drew significant attention from the media and the public. Victims of their actions, from citizens who had been intimidated to colleagues who had been suppressed, began to speak out boldly. They recounted their ordeals, from unjust extortion to blatant abuse of power. An elderly woman who had once stood up to David's misconduct was overcome with emotion during a community meeting organized by Mike. "I thought I'd never see justice served," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But today, I feel hope returning." The testimonies and evidence collected over weeks became a sharp sword that brought David and Steve to face numerous severe charges. Their defense attorneys tried to turn the tide, but the evidence was too damning. During the trial, Mike took the stand as the key witness. He delivered a detailed account of the abuses perpetrated by the 2 corrupt officers, supported by comprehensive records and community testimonies. David, once arrogant and smug, now sat silently. His face no longer bore its usual haughty expression. Instead, it showed exhaustion and despair. When Mike finished his testimony, David muttered under his breath, "He won't win. This system will never change." Following the trial, David and Steve were sentenced to prison on multiple charges, including abuse of power, intimidation, and extortion. Yet, Mike understood that this was only the beginning. True change had to come from within the system. Mike initiated sweeping reforms within the police department. Regular training sessions on professional ethics and public accountability were implemented. Internal review processes were strengthened to ensure that no misconduct could slip through the cracks. Mike also encouraged younger officers to speak up whenever they witnessed injustice. Thomas, Mike's most loyal ally, became his right-hand man in driving these changes. "I've been here long enough to see we're on the right path," Thomas said during a team meeting. "But we must be patient. Change doesn't happen overnight, but I believe we're laying a solid foundation." Mike didn't stop with the police force. He also turned his attention to the community. He organized regular meetings to hear from citizens, addressing past grievances and discussing hopes for the future. At one of these gatherings, a young boy approached him, eyes brimming with admiration. "Officer Mike, I want to be a policeman like you when I grow up. I want to protect everyone." Mike knelt down, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "If you promise to always do the right thing and stand up for justice, I believe you'll make an incredible officer." Moments like these gave Mike the strength to continue his mission. He knew that change wasn't just his responsibility, but a collective effort shared with the entire community. One evening, after a long day, Mike returned home. Sarah greeted him with a warm smile, while Emily and Lily played together in the living room. The family gathered around the dinner table, their laughter filling the air with warmth. It was a moment Mike had fought to protect, and he knew he would never stop fighting to preserve it. After dinner, Emily handed her father a new drawing. It depicted their family standing together under a radiant sun, with a police station in the background and the words written below, "Justice begins with courage." Mike held up the drawing, his eyes glimmering with pride. He hugged Emily, Lily, and Sarah tightly, silently vowing, "We've come a long way, but this is just the beginning." Outside, the winter night slowly gave way to the light of a new day. Mike knew more challenges lay ahead, but he was no longer alone. With his family, his team, and the community by his side, he was confident they had laid the foundation for a better future. A future where justice wasn't just a word, but a living reality in every action and every heart. On a fresh spring morning, the clear sky and soft sunlight illuminated the central area where Mike's police department headquarters was located. Since David and Steve were arrested and tried, the atmosphere at the station had changed noticeably. The whispers of doubt had gradually disappeared, replaced by the team's unity and determination to restore the community's trust. Mike stood before the entire team during the monthly meeting, his eyes reflecting a steadfast resolve. Standing at the podium, his voice resounded with strength. "Our journey doesn't end with arresting wrongdoers. This journey is about building an organization we can all be proud of. We are not just protecting the community, we are safeguarding our own honor and trust." The reforms Mike initiated began to bear fruit. Officers underwent intensive training on professional ethics, situational handling, and communication skills with the community. They were no longer seen as cold and distant figures, but as true friends and protectors of the people. Not only the police department, but the entire community began to feel the positive shift. At a meeting between the police force and the citizens, inspiring stories were shared. A man stood up to speak. "In the past, I never thought I could trust the police. But since Chief Anderson arrived, I've seen a difference. Now, I believe we can build a better relationship." Emily, sitting in the corner with Lily and Sarah, listened with proud eyes. She whispered to her mother, "Dad did it, Mom. Everyone believes in him now." Sarah smiled and nodded gently. "Your dad didn't just succeed. He proved that trust can be rebuilt, no matter how hard it is." Mike didn't stop at transforming his police department. He began collaborating with other departments in the region to share his reform experiences. Many senior leaders came to observe and learn from the model he created. Some were skeptical, but the results Mike achieved were undeniable. Thomas, always standing by Mike's side, remarked during a meeting, "I've witnessed these changes from the very beginning. It's not just one man's work, but the collective effort of an entire team, led by a leader who never gives up." Mike quietly nodded. He understood the road ahead remained long, but with the support of his teammates and the community, he believed they could achieve even greater milestones. One afternoon, after finishing work, Mike returned home. Emily and Lily were playing in the garden, while Sarah prepared dinner in the kitchen. The laughter of his daughters seemed to dissolve all his fatigue. Emily ran to her father, holding a new drawing in her hands. She held it up with a beaming smile. "Look, Dad, I drew our family standing in front of the police station. Here's you, the one in the center, protecting everyone." Mike took the drawing, studying each naive yet meaningful stroke. "I love it, Emily. You've made Dad feel stronger than ever." Lily also toddled over, tugging at Mike's hand. "Daddy, today I told my teacher that you're the best policeman in the world." Mike laughed, lifting Lily and kissing her forehead. "My little girl, you and your sister are the ones who make me strong. Because of you, I know I can never give up." That night, after the children had fallen asleep, Mike stood by the window gazing out at the city. The street lights stretched like beacons guiding the way through the darkness. He thought about the paths he had taken, the tough moments, the confrontations with injustice, and even the threats to his family. But now, he no longer felt burdened. Instead, a sense of peace and hope filled his heart. Sarah approached, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "Mike, you've done something not many people dare to attempt. You haven't just protected our family, but also those who need justice." Mike turned around, taking Sarah's hands. "I'm only doing what a husband, a father, and a police officer should do. But I know this isn't the end. There's still much more to accomplish." Sarah smiled. "I know, but I believe in you. Our whole family believes in you." Mike sat at his desk, picking up a sheet of paper and beginning to write. It wasn't a report or a plan, but a letter to himself. Never stop. Always remember why you started, for your family, for the community, and for those who need a reason to believe in justice. As he set the pen down, a sense of tranquility washed over him. Tonight, the city was quieter, and Mike knew that this peace was the result of his and his team's relentless efforts. More importantly, he realized that his journey had only just begun. The full moon above illuminated the room, symbolizing the completeness of the values he was protecting. And in the darkness of the long night, Mike Anderson stood firm, a man with an unyielding heart, a beacon of justice amidst life's storms. And so, Mike Anderson continued his journey, not just as a police chief, but as a husband, a father, and a symbol of the noble values everyone should strive for: courage, perseverance, and a desire to uphold justice. He proved that no matter how challenging and unjust the world may seem, as long as you hold on to your beliefs and act with integrity, everything can change. Mike's story is not just about triumphing over wrongdoers, but a reminder that the greatest strength lies not in power or fame, but in honesty, determination, and an unwavering will to never give up. For all of us, this story carries an important message. Stand up for what is right. Protect the ones you love, and never let fear stop you from pursuing justice. If you found meaning in this story, don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective on courage and the power of change. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next meaningful stories. Together, we can spread positive values and inspire even more people. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next stories.